After my husband died, my son asked. Should I tell the police? I said. Tell them what, baby? He looked at me and whispered. That I saw what you did. My heart stopped. He smiled like his father. Then he said, Don't worry. I helped you bury him. The gulls kept circling like they were waiting for the lid to come back up. Wind roughened the water beyond the jetty, and the prayer cards the pastor held clicked in his hands as if they had teeth. I stood with the lilies and watched the rope burn down to the coffin until the box looked like a drowned shadow. My boy had slipped off his shoes when I wasn't looking. He stood on the wet planks barefoot, counting the waves in a whisper that carried only to me. 9, 10, 11. He lost count when a gull screamed. He smiled at the sound the way kids smile at bad magic. Put your shoes on, I said. My voice was a thread pulled thin. He didn't look at me. He tipped his head, eyes on the place where the water refused to hold still, and I could see my husband's profile in that small stubborn jaw. Someone behind me coughed into a handkerchief. Someone else muttered, "Sea takes what it wants." The pastor tried to say the words that make the end into something other than the end. Salt stung the cuticle where I'd torn a hangnail that morning, a sting that kept me in my body when the rest of me wanted to go with the box. By the time the wind had shredded the last of the pastor's sentences, the boy had found a nail head with his big toe and was pressing at it like a button he could undo all of this with. He glanced up at me. "If you fall asleep underwater," he asked softly, "do you still dream?" "Put your shoes on," I said again, and this time he listened. We walked home the long way because I couldn't stand the shortcut through town. Couldn't stand the eyes that slid down my coat and measured my sadness the way they measure fish. The air had that marsh smell, sulfur and rotting grass, threaded under the cleaner salt. When we reached the porch, the tide in the inlet rested its chin on the mud like a dog, breathing quietly. Inside, the house had kept our shape. His cup left a ring on the nightstand. I stacked the clean shirts he'd never wear again, and my fingers remembered the way they'd learned to fold around the thickness of him. Remembered too many other things I was not ready to name. The kettle rattled against its own steam. My son stood on the chair by the window and drew with the heel of his hand, fogging a round patch of glass. He dragged his fingertip through the mist and made a spiral, then a line, then a small hill. When I brought the mugs over, he wiped it away with his sleeve, quick, like a secret. "Do you want honey?" I asked. He shook his head, eyes going to the table instead. He had pilfered the dull pencil from the junk drawer and he put it on the paper like he puts a toy boat into a bathtub, deliberate, careful not to splash. The pencil made a sound I could feel in my teeth. He drew a moon like the scrape of a thumbnail on a plate, and under it a dune. And on the dune a long leaning thing that could have been a cane or a metronome or the handle of a shovel. "That's nice," I managed too quickly. "It's nighttime," he said. "Because the moon." "I see that." He added a hill that wasn't there before and shaded it in with short, patient strokes, the way he shades the bellies of fish when he draws them, tender as if the paper could bruise. He smiled while he worked and his teeth looked small and new again. My hand went to the side drawer by itself the way a tongue goes to a missing tooth. The drawer caught on something halfway. It always had a trick to it. He knew the trick and I knew the trick, but my hand forgot. I yanked harder than I meant to and would protest it. The latch gave. Inside, under the tangle of rubber bands and paper clips and the house key we never used because we never locked the door, lay the fisherman's knife stretched like a sleeping animal. The blade looked cleaner than it had any right to look. I shut the drawer so fast the tea sloshed. The boy looked up. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Heat climbed my throat. I swallowed. He pushed the paper toward me. The mound he'd shaded had a tiny crosshatch at the top, the kind children make when they want to show a lid. He was proud in that unguarded way children are proud of something perfect in their head now made visible. I pressed my palm flat on the table and felt the grain of the wood travel through my skin like a message from the tree that had been here before this house knew us. The kettle clicked as it cooled. At bedtime, the house found its night noises again and tried them out. The bathroom pipes clucked like hens. The old floorboards sighed once, twice, as if things could be taught to forget just by lying still long enough. I lay awake and watched the strip of streetlight at the bottom of my door. The boy called from his room without calling. A whisper of blanket, the soft thud of a book sliding off the mattress. When I got there, he had pushed the quilts to his knees and was working under the bed with both hands like a mechanic. He pulled out another paper and bit the corner of it in concentration. What are you doing up? I kept my voice quiet in the way you do when you don't want to wake anything that might notice you're awake. I'm drawing the waves right, he said. It has to be where they can't reach. My skin went cold under my nightgown. What does? He blinked. The sleeping place. The word snagged in my throat. You had a bad dream, I said, before he could say anything else that would make my stomach drop through the floor. Go back to sleep. He slid the paper back under and pulled the blanket over his chest like a closing tide. When I kissed his forehead, it smelled like salt and pencil and the warm metal of sleep. In the hallway, I stood looking down at my own bare feet and waited for the house to tell me what to do. In the morning, a harbor cop stopped by because they always do when the sea keeps a thing it's not supposed to keep. He stood on the porch boards that had taken on the memory of every heel and boot that crossed them and tried to be kind. Loose ends, he said, and did not look past me into the house. He asked if we needed anything and if my husband had been drinking and if he'd said he was taking the small boat or the rowboat. I held my breath through the small row of questions and let it out after each one like I was threading a needle. No, I said. No, the small boat. My son stood behind the screen, fingers in the mesh, counting again without numbers. The cop's eyes flicked to the boy, then back to me. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. Thank you, I said, and the screen door made its loose hinge cry when I closed it. After he left, the house took on a waiting sound. The fridge hummed like a far engine. The clock tapped at time with its little patient knuckle. I went to the sink and hand-washed the mugs we'd already washed the night before and dried them with a towel gone thin as old flannel. In the streaked reflection of the window, I caught myself holding the dishcloth the way you hold a throat. My son pulled the first drawing from under the breadbox like a magician revealing a card he never actually hid. He added a small figure to the dune, a figure with a stick body and round head and little lines for fingers. He drew a second figure beside it. Both were holding the handle of the leaning thing. He paused when he finished the fingers, looked up at me, then at the drawer I had shut so quickly the night before. His mouth made the beginning of a question and then swallowed it. Wash your hands, I said. Breakfast. He carried the pencil to the sink and set it on the sill like it was a toothbrush. He scrubbed his fingers until they squeaked. When he looked back, his eyes narrowed the way his father's narrowed when he lined up a nail and a hammer. I felt the old bruise wake under my wrist bone. Felt the ghost of his grip there the way wind remembers a door it once slammed. Outside, fog rolled in from the inlet and pressed its face to our windows trying to look inside. I opened the basement door to get more sugar and stopped halfway down. Sand dusted the steps like sifted flour. A blade leaned against the upright freezer. Not the fisherman's knife but the other kind of blade. The longer one that fits a handle. I told myself it had always been there. I told myself many things the way you tell a child there's no monster in the closet while your own eyes hold the shape of one. When I came back up, my son had moved his drawing to the edge of the table closest to the door. He tapped a finger over the mound. If we dig here, he said without looking at me, will water come in? Why would we dig? My voice went too bright. He shrugged, an 8-year-old shrug that still carried a weight too much for it. To find the dream. I sat. I folded a napkin into a small boat, then unfolded it, then folded it again wrong so it couldn't float. Dreams don't need shovels, I said. He thought about that. The thinking took a long time. We ate toast without talking. The butter knife scraped the plate and the sound traveled up the bones of my arm to a place behind my ear. When he was done, he slid the drawing into the space between the fridge and the wall, a place crumbs go to become fossils. He washed his hands again. He went to the window and pressed his forehead to the glass, fogging it new, and drew another spiral with his breath. Do ghosts get sand in their mouths? He asked. Eat your orange, I said. A seed stuck to my thumb. It looked like a tear in something else. He peeled the orange and lined the segments in a row as if they were steps he could climb. He looked back at the drawer. I filled the kettle again though I didn't want tea and turned the knob to make the fire tick. The burner clicked and failed once before catching. In that small silence between the clicks, I heard again the sand sliding from a spade, and I knew I hadn't imagined it. The kettle began to whisper. The fog held its breath against the pane. My son tapped the glass twice, a code we didn't have, and said very softly, as if he were afraid to wake something that wasn't finished sleeping. I think I remember where. Rain came before light that morning, thin at first, then steady enough to blur the line between sea and sky. The roof dripped in slow syncopation with the clock, and I counted along until I lost the numbers. My boy's drawing from the day before lay forgotten, or pretending to be forgotten, between the fridge and the wall. When I bent to retrieve it, the edge tore and I caught the smell of graphite and damp paper sharp as pennies. He'd pressed so hard that the shapes ghosted onto the next sheet, a second image hiding beneath the first. I slipped both into the drawer, meaning to throw them away, and closed it too softly, as if noise might make them real again. The knock came after breakfast, the polite rhythm of someone who didn't want to be there. Mrs. Wilkes from next door stood on the porch, her umbrella dripping small black coins onto the planks. Heard the searches expanding, she said. Tide pushed up a bit of rope and a boot. Her eyes did that thing pity does, half concern, half hunger. You hanging in, dear? We're fine. The words left my mouth without inspection. The boy peered around my legs, one eye and half a smile. Say thank you, I told him. He did, though it sounded more like tank you. The old baby version sneaking back. Mrs. Wilkes patted his hair and left with the kind of sigh people give when they think they've been useful. I watched her umbrella tilt down the street until the fog swallowed it whole. The boy tugged my sleeve. Was that the lady who saw Daddy that night? I turned too fast. What night? The one before he went to sleep in the sea. My throat tightened. She didn't see him, sweetheart. Nobody did. He frowned like someone trying to remember a dream. I think she did. I told him to get his boots, though there was nowhere to go. We walked the narrow path behind the house where the dune grass leaned under the rain. The marsh smell rose thick, sweet rot. He kept stopping to watch puddles ripple, fascinated by the way each drop erased the last. Does the ground remember every puddle? He asked. Or does it forget? I didn't answer. My own boots sank half an inch each step, the mud taking more than it gave back. Halfway to the inlet, he knelt and pushed his finger into the sand, tracing something small, circular, deliberate. When I told him we should head home, he said, "Wait, I almost found it." His voice was calm, but the words clung to me the rest of the day. That evening the lights flickered. The storm outside was moving inland, taking with it the fragile quiet we'd been surviving on. I found the flashlight in the junk drawer, and my hand brushed the knife handle before I could stop it. The touch jolted me like finding a pulse in something that shouldn't have one. I snapped the drawer shut harder than before. From the next room the boy called, "Mom, can I draw?" I said yes without looking. Candlelight wobbled over the table. His pencil whispered across the page. When I leaned closer, pretending to tidy, I saw lines forming. The same hill, the same moon, but now the mound was open, something dark inside it. "That's new," I said, aiming for casual. "What's in there?" He didn't look up. "Dreams. They get stuck if you don't dig deep enough." I laughed too sharp. "That's a strange dream." It wasn't mine. He pressed harder, breaking the pencil tip. The sound made him jump. Then softly, "I think it was yours." A gust of wind slammed against the window, and for a second I thought the glass might break. I gathered the papers, meaning to put them away, but he reached out quick and grabbed the edge. "You'll crumple them," he said. The authority in his voice stopped me cold. His father's tone, worn small but still recognizable. We stared at each other across the table, candle flame between us like a living thing waiting for sides. Later, when he was asleep, I crept into his room. The candle had burned itself down to a puddle of wax. His drawings covered the floor like fallen leaves. Each one carried the same dune, the same hollow. I crouched, tracing the marks. In one, 2 figures stood over the hole. One taller, one smaller. No faces. The taller figure's arm was outstretched, hand open. Between the fingers, he'd drawn a thin black smear that could have been a stick or a knife or the shadow of one. My knees locked and I had to crawl backward before I could stand. The next morning, the harbor officer returned. He said they'd start dredging near the rocks. Routine, he called it. But his eyes lingered on me the way people look when they've heard gossip and want to test its shape. My son watched from the hallway, chewing on a piece of toast too long. "You doing all right, ma'am?" the officer asked. We'll keep you posted. When he left, the boy spoke without turning. They won't find him where they're looking. Don't say things like that. I tried to sound gentle, failed. People are trying to help. He didn't want help. You said so. I froze. When did I say that? He shrugged. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you just thought it loud. Something in me cracked then, small but final. I went to the sink, filled a glass, and drank until my throat hurt. The window's reflection showed us both. My hair unbrushed, his mouth sticky with jam, and between us the empty chair no one could sit in anymore. That night, I dreamed of the sea swallowing the house plank by plank. When I woke, my mouth tasted of salt. The sound that had woken me came again. A soft scrape below, where the cellar door met the floorboards. I slipped down barefoot, the air cold enough to bite. The flashlight beam caught dust in slow motion. The shovel leaned against the freezer, its metal clean, the handle wet. A small pile of sand rested on the lowest step, shaped like something trying to crawl upward. I wiped it away, but it came back in the beam's next sweep, the same shape, the same size. I left the light on when I went back up. He was sitting at the table in his pajamas, pencil already in hand. You were loud, he said. You should be asleep. He didn't argue. He just drew another curve on the paper, darker this time. I was finishing it, he whispered. The place where it stops. I wanted to ask what that meant, but my throat locked. I stood behind him, watching the tip of the pencil dig trenches into the page. When he set it down, the picture was a perfect map of the dunes. Every contour right. Every shadow exactly where it should be. In the lower corner, he'd written something in shaky letters. Where the waves can't reach. I touched his shoulder. He didn't flinch. Who told you that? He smiled, sleepy. You did. The wind moaned in the chimney, low and long, the way it did that night before the water took him. My hands found the edge of the table to steady themselves, nails biting into wood. The boy yawned and laid his head on his arms. His breath came even, soft, and I couldn't tell if he was asleep or pretending. Outside, the fog pressed its face to the window again, patient as ever. When I turned off the light, the pencil rolled across the table, stopped against the words he'd written, and pointed east toward the dunes. The fog didn't lift for 3 days. It crawled over the dunes like something that had learned to breathe. The boy said it made the air feel thick. And he was right. Everything inside the house felt heavy, from the curtains to my own lungs. I started sleeping on the couch with the lamp on, though I told myself it was just for company. At night, when the sea wind rattled the windows, I could swear I heard someone breathing just beyond the glass. On the 4th morning, sunlight broke through for the first time since the storm. It didn't look clean. More like bruised light filtering through dirty water. But it was enough to make me open the curtains. Outside, the sand glittered with broken shells. The boy stood in the yard still wearing his pajamas, tracing something in the damp earth with a stick. Breakfast first, I called from the porch. He didn't move. I stepped closer. The lines he drew weren't random. They curved and crossed, forming the same mound, the same hill he'd been sketching over and over. A circle sat at the center of it. I recognized the shape before my mind would name it. A shallow grave scaled small by a child's imagination. I grabbed his wrist. Where did you see this? He blinked, confused, as if I'd interrupted him mid-song. You told me, he said simply. I never told you anything like that. He frowned. You said it was deep enough now. My stomach turned. I what? You said not to worry. That he wouldn't hurt us again. I let go too fast. He rubbed the wrist where my fingers had pressed, not crying, just watching me with that same steady, unnerving calm. Inside, the kettle whistled too long before I remembered it. When I poured the water, my hands shook hard enough to spill it across the counter. The burn barely registered. The boy sat at the table swinging his legs, humming the tune his father used to whistle when he was fixing nets. I wanted to tell him to stop, but I couldn't find my voice. That afternoon, I tried to clean the drawer where the knife was kept. It wasn't there. I emptied every compartment, spoons, forks, bottle caps, old receipts, but the space was hollow. A chill rolled through me that had nothing to do with the draft creeping under the door. I searched the kitchen, then the hallway, the basement. Nothing. When I came back up, the boy was in the living room. The television flickered without sound, filling the room with ghost light. On the coffee table sat the knife, gleaming, resting on a folded piece of paper. My throat closed. "Where did you find that?" "In the sand," he said. It was sticking out like a shell. I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was one of his drawings again, same dune, same circle. But this time in shaky block letters he'd written 2 words across the page: "He's calling." I dropped the knife into the sink and ran water over it until the metal steamed. "You shouldn't touch things like that," I said, my voice too high, too brittle. "He was calling me," the boy repeated softly. "I heard him under the sand. He said my name." My knees nearly gave out. I turned off the water, the pipes sighing in the walls. "Sweetheart, that's just a dream. Sometimes our minds." "He said your name too." The sound of it made my hands go numb. I pressed them against the counter to steady myself. He watched me the way children watch the horizon before a storm. Expectant, unafraid. That night I couldn't stay in the house. The walls felt too close. I told him we were going for a walk, that we both needed air. The moon hung low and crooked over the dunes. The sand, still wet from rain, held our footprints like memories that didn't fade. Halfway to the shoreline he stopped. "Here," he said. "Here what?" He pointed at a patch where the dune rose slightly higher, like a held breath. "This is where he is." The words were so calm they made the night louder. "Stop it," I whispered. "You don't know what you're saying." "I remember," he said. "You had dirt on your hands. You said we had to be fast before the tide came in." My whole body went cold. The sound of waves filled the silence between us. I wanted to tell him it wasn't true, that he'd mixed dreams with stories, but the lies stuck like sand in my mouth. He stepped closer to the mound. "Do you hear it now?" The wind whistled through the sea grass, a hollow rhythmic sound that could almost be mistaken for a voice. My pulse quickened. I reached for his arm. "We're going home." "I'm not scared," he said. "I am." That broke something inside me. I scooped him up, heavier than I remembered, and carried him back down the path. He didn't fight me. He laid his head against my shoulder and murmured, "You don't have to keep him quiet anymore." I didn't sleep. Near dawn, I sat at the table staring at the knife in the sink, its clean surface catching the first gray light. The boy's words looped through my head until they became memories. Real or imagined, I couldn't tell. The flash of a hand, a shove, the metallic smell of blood and sea wind. His voice, my husband's, saying my name one last time, not with love but with disbelief. The sound of something heavy hitting wet ground. When I looked down, my hands were shaking so hard the cup slipped and shattered on the floor. The boy appeared in the doorway, hair wild from sleep. "You were crying," he said. "No," I lied, wiping my face. "Just tired." He walked over and took my hand. His small fingers were cold. "It's okay," he whispered. "I remember why." "Why what?" "Why you had to." I stared at him, breath trapped in my chest. "Go back to bed," I managed. He didn't move. Instead, he glanced toward the window. "They're coming," he said. "Who?" He pointed. Outside, through the veil of fog, 2 flashlights bobbed toward the dunes, police or maybe search volunteers. Their beams cut slow arcs through the mist, landing dangerously close to where the sand had been disturbed. I grabbed his shoulders. "Listen to me," I said, whispering fast. "You can't talk to anyone about what you saw. Not the sand, not the knife, not." He pulled back slightly. "But you said truth makes things clean." The world outside filled with the sound of engines and voices calling names. I felt everything unravel at once, the neat version of grief, the silence that had held us together. My son's face looked impossibly calm. He reached up, touched the tear I hadn't realized was there, and said, "If they ask me, I'll tell them where the waves can't reach." Before I could answer, someone knocked on the door. Not polite this time, 3 firm, official knocks that made the dishes tremble. The boy turned toward the sound, his shoulders straight, his expression strangely bright. "Mom," he said, almost whispering. "I think they already know." The knock sounded again, sharper this time. The boy looked at me the way someone looks at a candle they're waiting to see go out. I wiped my palms on my skirt and opened the door before they could do it a third time. 2 men stood there. The harbor detective with the tired eyes and another younger one holding a notepad that looked too clean. The fog had settled on their coats in beads that refused to melt. "Morning, Mrs. Hale," the older one said. His voice was polite but stripped of warmth. Sorry to bother you again. We've extended the search perimeter. Just checking in. Of course, I said. My voice sounded like someone else's. The boy had drifted to the doorway, the hem of his pajama pants brushing the floor. Go back inside, sweetheart. The younger man glanced at him. That your boy? He's quite the artist, I hear. Miss Carter at school said he's been drawing the shoreline in remarkable detail. Something cold climbed my spine. He likes to draw, I said. The detective tilted his head. Funny thing. Some of his sketches match areas we've been looking at. Almost like he's been there recently. The boy smiled faintly. I draw what I see. I stepped in front of him. He's imaginative, I said too quickly. Children remember shapes. They don't always mean anything. The older detective nodded once, the gesture slow. Mind if we have a quick look at those drawings, ma'am? I already packed them away. I lied. Just routine, he said again, the phrase people use when they know it isn't. I forced a smile that cracked on one side. Maybe later. We were just sitting down to breakfast. He looked past me into the kitchen. Right. We'll leave you to it then. You let us know if anything turns up. When I closed the door, my hands were trembling. The boy stood behind me watching. They liked my drawings, he said, almost proud. Stop showing them, I hissed. Do you understand? You can't draw those places anymore. He frowned, confused. But that's where he is. The words hit like a wave. I turned away so he wouldn't see my face break. Go wash your hands, I whispered. He lingered in the doorway, small and silent. Then he said, You said not to lie. His voice was so soft I almost missed it. I turned, but he was already gone, padding down the hallway to his room. All morning the house hummed with the sound of nothing. I tried to scrub the kitchen counter, the sink, the same plates I'd washed the night before, but the silence swelled until it pressed against my ears. Every tick of the clock felt like an accusation. By noon I couldn't stand it. I grabbed the old fishing jacket from the peg and told him we were going out. Where? He asked, sliding into his boots. For air, I said. The wind off the inlet carried a strange sweetness. Algae, salt, and something metallic underneath. The dunes had changed since the last storm. The ridges seemed taller, the hollows deeper. He walked ahead of me, his hair blowing across his eyes. He stopped near the ridge, the same one he'd drawn 100 times. Here, he said again, pointing. I wanted to scream that he was wrong, that he couldn't know what I had done. But I followed his finger to the sand. Someone had been there. Fresh boot prints. Long, deep ones, and not ours. I scanned the shoreline. A group of men in bright vests stood farther down, their heads bent toward the ground, shovels glinting in the gray light. The detectives. They were closer than they should have been. My chest tightened. We need to go, I said. Are they finding him? The boy asked. Don't say that. He didn't move. You said he was sleeping. Enough. My voice cracked through the air. The men down the beach turned, shielding their eyes against the wind. I grabbed the boy's arm and yanked him toward home. He stumbled, sand flying around our feet like smoke. Back inside, I shut the door and locked it. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet house. I dropped to my knees and pulled the bottom drawer open again, digging through the clutter. The drawings were still there, dozens of them. The dunes, the hill, the shovel, and in the newest one, the outlines of men digging. He'd drawn it before we left. I tore them in half, then in quarters until the pieces covered the floor. The boy watched from the doorway, face pale, eyes unreadable. They're just paper, I said, breathing hard. Nothing more. He looked down at the torn pieces, then back up at me. If they're just paper, why are you scared of them? The question sliced through the room. Before I could answer, headlights cut through the window. A car pulled up outside. The same detectives. Their voices carried faintly through the fog. Muffled orders, the squawk of a radio. I turned to him. Listen to me. Go to your room. Don't say a word when they ask questions. Promise me. He nodded, but not the way a child promises. More like someone humoring a stranger. When the knock came, I opened the door before they could start calling my name. The older detective tipped his hat out of habit. Sorry again, ma'am. We've found something near the dunes. Need you to come identify. My stomach turned to ice. Identify what? He looked down, thumb rubbing the brim of his hat. Can't say for certain yet. Behind him, the boy had slipped silently onto the porch. The younger detective crouched to his height. Hey there, champ. You know those dunes pretty well, don't you? The boy looked past him toward the beach, then back at me. Yes, he said softly. Maybe you could help us, the man said. Show us where you and your mom used to walk. I felt the air leave my lungs. He's not going anywhere, I said. The boy's gaze didn't waver. I can show you. The younger detective smiled. That'd be real helpful. Stay here, I whispered. But he'd already stepped off the porch, small boots pressing into the same sand that had once hidden every trace. The detectives followed, slow and cautious, the fog curling around them like smoke. I went after them because I couldn't not. The wind pushed against me, carrying the distant sound of waves breaking. When we reached the ridge, the boy stopped. He pointed to the place he always did, the mound just beyond the grass line. There, he said. The men exchanged a glance. One signaled to another farther down. Shovels lifted. The first slice of metal against earth made a sound that hollowed me out. I could almost feel it, the sand peeling back, the truth breathing underneath. The older detective looked at me over his shoulder. You sure you haven't been here lately, Mrs. Hale? I shook my head, but the lie was too small to hold. The boy was watching me, waiting for something, permission maybe. His lips parted, but no sound came. When the shovel hit something solid, the younger detective froze. Got it, he called. The word carried through the wind like a bell. I took a step forward before I knew I was moving. My hand found the boy's shoulder. He turned to me, eyes wide, face pale in the weak light. I could see myself reflected in his pupils, small and shaking. Mom, he said quietly. It's okay now. The sound of digging stopped. Someone shouted for a tarp. The gulls overhead began to scream. The detective turned, his voice careful. Ma'am, we're gonna need you to come with us. The wind pulled at my coat, tugging it open. The air tasted like metal again. The boy reached for my hand, and I felt the tiniest tremor in his fingers. It's okay, he said again, and this time I believed he meant it, not as comfort but as truth finally rising to the surface. Behind us, the sand shifted with the sound of something being unearthed. The boy let go of my hand, stepped forward and pointed to the ground. That's where Mommy said to stop, he told them. The shovels made no sound after that first hollow strike, just the scrape of metal slowed by dread. The younger detective knelt, brushed away the top layer of sand, and pulled back, pale under the shifting light. Someone muttered into a radio, too quiet to make out. The wind dropped all at once, as if the air itself wanted to listen. The boy's hand tightened around mine, small fingers cold and dry. The older detective looked up. Ma'am, he said, voice gentler now, we'll take it from here. I nodded, though I didn't move. My shoes were already half buried. When the men stepped closer, I caught the smell of the sea turning brackish. Wet metal, salt, something faintly sweet like rot that's given up pretending to be alive. They unfolded a tarp, their movements oddly reverent, and I watched it bloom open like a gray flag of surrender. The younger one crouched lower, called out measurements that hung in the fog. About 4 feet down, torso visible. His voice trembled only once, and he looked toward the boy, quick and ashamed. Get him away from here, the older one said. I wanted to obey, to gather my son and walk him home through the fog, pretend this was all another storm passing. But my body stayed rooted. The boy stood still beside me, watching with the same solemnity he'd had at the funeral, as if this were just another ceremony, another ritual the grown-ups performed when someone had gone where the waves can't reach. Mom, he said softly. I forced the word out. What is it? He looked up at me, searching. Are they mad at you? No, I lied. He frowned. They should be. That nearly dropped me. My knees wavered, but I didn't fall. One of the detectives came over, voice low, his boots whispering against the sand. Ma'am, we'll need a statement at the station. We'll have to ask some questions about the night he disappeared. I know, I said, though my mouth felt foreign, the words slurred by the tide inside my chest. But my boy, he doesn't. We'll take care of him, the detective said. The boy's hand slipped from mine before I could stop him. He stepped closer to the ridge, watching as they lifted the first edge of the tarp. He didn't flinch. His voice, when it came, was almost tender. "You don't have to keep him quiet anymore," he said. They didn't hear him over the wind, but I did. The sentence cut through every wall I'd built, every story I'd told myself since that night. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out except the sound of air leaving a room too quickly. They guided us to the car. I didn't remember walking. The door shut, and the window fogged from my breath. Down at the shore, the figures bent and straightened, moving like ghosts in the mist. The boy pressed his hand against the glass. His reflection sat over theirs, the living and the dead blurred together. At the station, they kept us in separate rooms. Mine smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. A fan hummed in the ceiling, turning slow as a heartbeat. The older detective sat across from me, hat on the table, notebook open. He didn't start right away. Just looked at me with something like pity and exhaustion tangled together. "You want to tell me what happened?" I stared at the scratches on the table. The pattern looked like waves frozen mid-crash. He waited, pen hovering. "We're not here to judge you. But the boy's drawings, his statements, well, they match what we found. You can make this easier if you just tell us the truth." I laughed once, the sound dry and too loud. "Truth," I said. "You think it's something you can just dig up?" He didn't answer. My voice shook as I began. "He came home late that night. Drunk. Again. Said the boat engine had stalled, that I'd jinxed him somehow. He started shouting before he'd even shut the door." I rubbed at the heel of my palm, remembering the sound of it, the slam, the rattle of glass. "He said he knew I'd been hiding money. That I was planning to leave." "And were you?" the detective asked quietly. "Yes." He nodded for me to continue. He threw a plate at the wall. Then he grabbed me by the hair. The boy woke up. He saw. My throat closed, but I forced it open again. He told him to stop. Just a kid standing there in his pajamas, telling his father to stop. The detective's pen didn't move. I ran to the kitchen. I just wanted something to make him let go. I swallowed. The knife was there. I didn't even think. When I turned around, he was coming at me again, shouting. I held it up. He walked right into it. The fan ticked once. I tried to help him. Tried to stop the bleeding. My hands flexed without meaning to, remembering the warmth of it. He kept saying my name like it was a curse. The detective looked down at his notebook, eyes unreadable. And the boy. He was standing by the door, crying but quiet. He said we had to hide him before anyone found out. Said he'd help me. I smiled then, but it broke halfway through. He was so calm. Like it was a chore he already knew how to do. Silence stretched until it thinned into air. Finally, he said, "Where did you bury him?" I closed my eyes. "Where the waves can't reach." He exhaled softly, capped his pen and stood. "That'll do for now." They took me to another room after that. Through the small window, I saw my son sitting with a woman in a gray suit. She gave him a paper cup of juice, and he held it with both hands, sipping slow. His legs didn't reach the floor. He looked smaller than I remembered, fragile as something that had been folded too many times. When she leaned down to ask him something, he turned toward the glass, as if he could feel me watching. Our eyes met for a heartbeat. He smiled faintly and mouthed something I couldn't hear. I think it was sorry. Or maybe safe. They called me back in to sign the statement. The pen felt heavy. My hands left faint smudges on the paper. When it was done, they led me through the back door to a waiting car. The air outside had changed, the fog thinning, the light cutting through in pale ribbons. I could see the inlet from here, the line of waves rolling toward shore, steady, endless. As they opened the car door, I turned once more toward the station. Through the glass, the boy was still there, talking now, his hands moving as if he were drawing in the air. The social worker nodded, listening. He pointed toward the horizon, tracing invisible shapes only he could see. I watched until the officer's hand brushed my arm. "We'll take you to holding now, ma'am." Inside the car, the seatbelt clicked, a small final sound. The wheels crunched over gravel. As we pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of the boy through the rear window, sitting still, head bowed. The fog swallowed him as we turned the corner. Somewhere behind us, I heard gulls start to cry. I leaned my forehead against the glass and whispered, "It's over." But the word didn't feel right. The tide doesn't end, It just keeps coming back, washing the same sins clean, then dirty again. The officer said something I didn't catch. I stared at the horizon until it blurred. The car moved faster. In the distance, the sea flashed once bright as steel. It looked almost like light glancing off a blade. They gave me a room with no window, just a narrow slit of frosted glass that let in a square of dull light. The walls were white, too clean to look real, and the bed hummed faintly when I leaned against it, as if the metal frame remembered the last person who sat there. Night stretched long and soundless, broken only by the footsteps of guards that came and went like tides. I counted them until my mind turned the rhythm into waves: 1, 2, 3, crash, pull, repeat. I wondered if he could hear the same sound, wherever they'd taken him. On the third morning, a lawyer came. She wore a gray suit and a smile that had been trained to look kind. She spread papers across the small metal table. "If you plead guilty to manslaughter," she said, "given the evidence, the cooperation, the circumstances." Her eyes flicked to me, then down again. "It could be 10 years. Maybe less." I nodded. The words felt far away, like they were meant for someone who hadn't already confessed to herself 100 times before saying it aloud. "And my son?" I asked. "He's with foster care for now. He'll have counseling evaluation. They say he's insightful." She hesitated on the word, as if it might mean something dangerous. "He keeps drawing. They've been encouraging that." I could almost see him there. Small desk, crayons spread like offerings, head bent, tongue caught between his teeth as he shaded the edges of the world. "Does he ask about me?" Her pause was soft, careful. "Every day." When she left, I asked for paper. The guard sighed but brought some anyway. I folded the first sheet into a boat and watched it sit useless in my palm, dry and still. Then I started to write. Not a statement this time, not a confession. Just words that sounded like home. "You were right about the tide," I wrote. "Forgets, but only for a while. Then it comes back for what you thought it had given away." I didn't know if I'd ever send it. I folded the letter and slid it beneath the mattress, next to another one from the night before. By the end of the week, there were 6 of them, small white boats waiting for water. The trial was quick. The courtroom smelled of dust and polish. Faces blurred into a single shape. Neighbors, reporters, strangers pretending to care. The boy wasn't there. I asked not to see him, though I didn't know if it was mercy for him or punishment for me. When the sentence was read, I barely heard the number. The sound of the judge's gavel was the same as a shovel striking sand. That night, in the transport van, the window was just big enough to glimpse the ocean once more before the road turned inland. The horizon shone silver under the dying sun, and I realized it had the same color as his eyes when he said, "You don't have to keep him quiet anymore." In prison, the days arranged themselves into quiet shapes. Work, meal, sleep, repeat. The women were mostly ghosts, faces turned inward, eyes dulled by stories too heavy to retell. One of them, Alma, gave me a stub of a pencil and said, "Write it down or it'll eat you." I didn't tell her I already was. I wrote to him every Sunday, though I never knew if the letters reached. I told him about the birds nesting above the yard floodlights, how their wings looked white at night even though they were black. I told him how the guards changed shifts with the sound of keys like wind chimes. I told him I dreamed of the sea, but only in pieces, never the whole. After 6 months, a reply came. The envelope was thick with extra paper. His handwriting had changed, taller and more deliberate. "Dear Mom, they said I could write now. I'm learning to plant things. We put seeds in boxes of sand so they can grow straight. The teacher says I draw too many holes, but I told her it's just where the roots breathe. Do you get to see the ocean from there? I hope so. I still dream about that night, but it's not scary anymore. Sometimes I hear him in my dreams, but he's quiet. I think he's finally sleeping. Love, your boy." I read it until the words blurred. That night I dreamed of him standing on the dunes, older now, the wind in his hair. He waved, but not to say goodbye. More like acknowledgement, a silent truce between memory and mercy. The seasons shifted. Letters came less often, but I kept writing anyway. My hands remembered the motion even when my words began to thin. The other women teased me. "You writing to the tide again, Hale?" But they said it kindly. Alma helped me plant marigold seeds in a small patch of dirt behind the laundry shed. "They bloom in salt air," she said. "Stubborn things." Years blurred. Routine wore the edges off everything, even guilt. But it never left. It just learned to sit beside me quietly. Sometimes at night, I'd hear the faint whistle of the sea through the pipes and imagine it was the same wind crawling through our old house, carrying sand across the floor. Then one spring morning they called my name. Early release. Good behavior, overcrowding, paperwork, mercy, whatever they wanted to call it. 10 years turned into 8. The world outside felt too loud at first. Colors sharper, air raw. The halfway house was near the coast. I could smell the salt before I saw the water. The first night, I walked down to the beach alone. The tide was low, pulling its secrets back toward the horizon. I stood where the sand dipped and the waves licked my ankles, and for a long moment, I let the cold sting remind me I was still here. The next day, a letter waited for me in the lobby. No return address, just a small sketch on the envelope. A boat and a line of birds overhead. My hand shook as I opened it. Mom, it began. I'm 17 now. I wanted you to see what I made. There's a garden behind the foster home. I planted marigolds like the ones you drew once. They don't mind the salt. I think of you every time they bloom. There was a folded paper inside, soft from handling. I opened it and found a drawing. Dunes under a clean sky, the same ridge where everything had ended. But this time the mound was gone. In its place grew a patch of small, bright flowers bending toward the light. At the bottom he'd written, "The waves reach everywhere now. Isn't that good?" I pressed the paper against my chest and sat on the sand until the sun rose, painting the water gold. The tide came in, reached my feet and didn't stop. For the first time in years I didn't move away. I wrote him back that night by the window, the same moon shining on both of us, even if miles apart. You were right, I told him. Truth is the tide. Takes and it gives. Pulls it, cleans it, stays. When I finished, I left the letter unsealed, propped by the window. The wind lifted it once, then let it settle. Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, the sea kept breathing. I imagined his voice carried on it, small and steady, calling not for help but for home. And I listened, waiting for the tide to answer back.